Have you ever noticed how much your unhealthy obsession with food, your filthy ass, or your joystick have been ruining your life?
No, what the fuck?
Well, you're wrong, but don't worry. Sigmund Freud is here to save you from yourself and help you move on from being obsessed with caca to the more healthy ideal of coupling with your mom in holy matrimony.
That doesn't sound like progress.
Yeah, but let's face it, we're not here to fix anybody. This prophetic, coke-addled genius says that early childhood experiences shape personality and behavior through 5 stages, each focused on different erogenous zones. So if you get fixated on any of these psychosexual stages as a kiddo, it could lead to disastrous catastrophes like purposefully developing recurring hemorrhoids or becoming a communist Scientologist. Today, we will be saving 5 unworthy bastards from themselves using totally legitimate, accurately portrayed, not at all outdated psychology theory, making sure to leave these patients alive so they can become productive members of society. Poring over the ancient texts, we made the careful decision to elect Kairos Fate Weaver as the face of our healing movement. If you look closely, you will notice that Kairos has 2 heads, one which torments him with repressed memories of the past, and another which dangles desires and anxieties in front of him. Like the 2 heads, Zinch and Freud will hook up to become one well-adjusted freak fixer to help us manipulate and slaughter our enemies, turning their minds and fantasies against them. Before we can get to our first target, we must first set up base in the southern wastes. We find ourselves next to a mob of abandoned, out-of-work former child actors forced to live life on the streets. Clearly in need of amateur therapeutic assistance, we pulled out our weapons and stormed them on the field. With a high ground advantage, we snuck our chaos furies up behind the infected frogs as Kairos hurled spells at them from a safe distance. Inexperienced with Zinch as I was, I forgot to check the shields, and before long, I realized the cavalry was quickly losing steam. With swarming toads and nurglings on the rise, we quickly regrouped to gather the enemy into a cluster and blast them with blue horror missiles until the disease dealers scurried away. Aware that a lack of money for malpractice insurance would be the death of our clinic, we carefully selected construction sites and plotted to take over Antarctica as the safe haven for our doctors. Without incident, we captured Volatrax and the Skull Carver's abode. Of course, the Nurgle's end-stage, plague-riddled minds were no match for talk therapy, and before long, we found Slanesh's answer to the last person you want mentoring your drug-addicted daughter. We cannot yet afford an army strong enough to attack Abyssa in her settlement, so we sneakily decide to take each of her settlements before luring her out to the field for a fight when we're strong enough. Meanwhile, to the left of our humble clinic, we find a new age cult of quacks led by our older and hotter stepbrother Kronos, who used fringe magic like drugs and science, rather than stopping his patients from denying their sexual attraction to their parents. We didn't like this one bit and decided he was incapable of treating anyone, so like any good therapist, I pushed that weakling aside and began fighting his battles for him. Ah yes, the most primitive form of the human mind, lizards. It's a wonder we evolved from such imbecilic dipshits to our current majestic state. Luring their dangerous shooters from the safety of the pack, we charged their front lines, raining hooves onto their misshapen skulls and false nails. Their deceptive strategy of spreading out with no apparent formation led to miscast spells and more dead screamers, but we maintained order with our ranged units who represent repressed desires erupting onto the battlefield of the conscious mind, slaughtering dozens of lizards in the process. Though the dastardly criminals managed to give us a few paper cuts, it was nothing like the scores of scorched chameleons they were forced to leave behind. Nearby, Grocholex's Glare Lighthouse housed an impudent little twerp named Komodo, who needed a good paddling about 20 years ago, but in lieu of a sensible army commander, he will receive the Ziggy treatment. What's that skink? Oh, it's several hundred blorange-colored fly-eaters eager to die rather than face their inner turmoil. Dealing powerful damage early on with cotton candy spells and flames, the lizards charged towards our unguarded front lines, snagging a few horrors along the way. Determined to not end up disadvantaged after scattering, we used the Furies and Heroes to isolate the most dangerous units and destroy them before circling the remaining roving enemies and banishing them to an eternal sleep. Fighting more lizards left this gross copper taste in my mouth that perplexed me. What causes such phenomena? I spat chameleon blood onto the grass and peered into the shape that it left on the ground. Feeling complex emotions while staring into the bodily fluids, I realized the taste came from my hatred of lizards, and to resolve these feelings, I need to abandon this useless fight and focus my precious energies elsewhere. With Antarctica under control, we recruited another lord, Sir Thoriel, and decided it was time to head north to our first major patient, Trade Lord Greasus, Tribe Stealer, Drake Crush, Gate Crusher, Horde Master Goldtooth, the shockingly obese, or as his friends call him, the King of Oral. Young Greasus is trapped in the first stage of development, dependent on pleasures of the mouth. He fills his days and his gob with a nauseating supply of food as a pacifier to quell his inner turmoil. We must save him so that the only depends he'll have to worry about are the ones covering his ass. Despite being blue, Kairos is no Felpian fish and gets violently ill when traveling over water, which would hurt our chances of victory once we get to the Mountains of Morn. So I sent South up to his place because frankly, I care about him less. Ooh, a treasure is available for the taking. I ate a bunch of oranges in preparation for this voyage, so I doubt pirates will be a problem. Fuck. Well, a doctor doesn't let a simple loss of their entire staff to a horde of limp-sailed rum sponges get them down. With Sarth out of commission, reeking of mermaid's regret, I sent Kairos to Greasus as I should have done in the first place. What I did not account for was how frickin' long it would take to sail up there, even at full speed. Several buckets of puke later, with Kairos looking green in the gills, he finally docked on land and captured Bitter Bay for somewhere to rest before the march towards the Great Hall of Greasus. Speaking of the last thing firefighters want to find in a tree, I couldn't see Greasus nearby, but I'm sure he's around here somewhere. After 4 seconds of looking, my patience ran out. Where the hell is Greasus?
Hey cat, calm down. He's probably gonna respawn in like 5 turns.
You can't hide from your need for oral resolution? A few frustrated turns later, with a clump of hair at my feet and a hole chewed right through my cheek, Greasus magically appeared nearby. Nobody knows how. I captured the Great Hall of Greasus to get his attention, and when that failed to lure him in, I declared war on old Lord Arse. But true to form, his gluttony fought with his sloth, and this time, the sloth won. Greasus's belt might be bulging, but his chariot isn't going anywhere, so I gathered my courage and attacked him in Grimtop. With Greasus in the preferred seating position for a session of psychoanalysis, we encouraged him to say whatever came to his mind. But instead of words, he mostly continued eating and gargling out random sounds. Unable to determine what needs he was expressing beyond more food now, we started killing his spearmen in an effort to get him to take us more seriously. When he refused to open up about his recent dreams, we interpreted this as a sign of aggression and assaulted his front lines. Greasus was determined to chase down our horses, seeing their bodies as the replacement for his next mammoth leg in his hands. He was transferring his infant needs of being fed to his therapist. Thinking quickly, we began isolating the meat-sweat monarch to see how he would react to fighting by himself. The rest of his army was certainly failing without him. He made them dependent on him the way he depended on food. So we set about destroying the beast within by killing his physical form, in effect forcing his army to surrender, and the day was ours. With Greasus a mere stain on the boxers of humanity, we decided to delay Kairos' return trip so he can recover for a bit and let Sarth take the torch for a while. Our next target is the dirtiest little freak our therapy couch has ever buckled beneath. Old anal retentive himself, Festus the Leech Lord. Trapped in the capacity of a 3-year-old, all he can think about is his next shit. But he needs to fear not, because Daddy Freud is here to untangle his thoughts. While Greasus was unable to do much more than grow mold in his chair, while an unholy cacophony of slurps and squelches erupt from his pie hole, Festus is a much more productive member of society, as he goes around expelling noxious fluids in the form of plagues, responding to society's demands for evil by acting as a villain, killing almost as many people as the healthcare system. While we managed to avoid falling for any more seafaring treasure traps, we chose not to engage Sarth's army with any desert armies for the entirety of this journey, leading to serious depletion of life by the time he dragged his attrited army to the underbelly of the Empire. Eyeing the first settlement in sight, I snuck into the Vampire Coast settlement of Whoopad and hoped that no one noticed. Turns out this move was on a whole new level of stupid because the Vampire Coast are best friends with Luckily, my IQ tops the bell curve, so if I'm making mistakes like this, my competition must be having trouble figuring out how to breathe while they're eating.
Cat, that's not at all how that works.
Explain it.
The top of the bell curve.
Bored. I colonized the empty Nurgle province capital, Hergig, and chose that moment of unearned glory to officially declare war on Festus. I hoped he would jiggle on over to me rather than pulling a Greasus and making me walk into that wasteland smelling of week-old pus and vomit in a gym shoe. Unfortunately, Festus is in denial of his issues, offering 4,000 gold for a peace treaty to bribe me from performing my clinical duties. Sucks to be him, because I would never take a bribe from someone in such dire need of help. Well, not a monetary bribe anyway. I suddenly noticed Azazel posturing nearby, so I marched over to intimidate him. I forgot to check whether he was in league with Festus, however, and the messy bitch snatched up Hergig. Somewhere between turns, the rotten pepper in the back of the fridge raided Wurtbad with his hulking army, and for whatever reason, didn't bother to take the entire settlement. It took me 3 turns to realize this little scamp left a trickster cult to fester in my settlement. This can only mean one thing. Vlad is actually the changeling. Suddenly, my personal conflict to help face Kairos' Vladdy issues through Sarth was challenging my duty to help Festus. But a doctor has obligations to their reputation. Remembering my Hippocratic oath, I adjusted my therapist stocking over my face and attacked Festus in Hergig. Remembering how tough it was to get Greasus to open up for anything besides food, I threatened Festus straight out of the gate by sending the Mutilith Vortex Beast straight towards him. He seemed to somehow throw diarrhea on the ground, but luckily missed most of our troops. He was replicating memories from his past. I began encouraging him to direct his urges to something more healthy, like abandoning the fight. Feeling exposed, Festus surrounded himself with the majority of his forces, making it easy to polish off the extraneous units and pound our message of therapy into his bulbous skull. Immediately after the battle, Festus, somehow still alive, once again ask for that peace treaty. Feeling he made sufficient progress after all that panicking and bleeding, I accepted. With the patient now sufficiently therapized, we abandoned this vulnerable husk of disease with the tools to heal, but no real concept of how to actually do so. Before Kairos got a chance to work out his parental problems, Vlad, very selfishly, died. Kairos finds out from Surf that the changeling is dead, causing an instantaneous crisis of ego dissolution as his once settled neuroses came crashing back to the surface. Dead changeling means Kairos will never resolve his daddy issues. I couldn't exactly send him to work while he's useless to me. Fortunately, just so happens that our next patient is much closer to South anyway, so I began the process of deporting Kairos back to Antarctica. Unlike Sigvald, while allegedly magnificent, is in no way a golden child. No one spends more than 10 minutes on their appearance unless they're compensating for deep insecurities stemming from extreme hideousness, and this Argo clocks in at 5 hours a day. He will never know how to have an actual relationship with other humanoids without our help. Setting foot in the icy lands caused Sarth to shrivel up and huddle against his army for warmth, but they blocked him the same way that Nigerian prince suddenly left me hanging. Desperate for a place to lay the army's heads, I knocked on the first castle gate that I could find and challenged its owner Vigo for ownership. As usual, I sent the Furies and other flyers away from the main fight, and for whatever reason, the enemy lord, hero, and some scantily clad lads were far more interested in these frivolous fellas than my strongest units. But we didn't take this personally. This tendency to beat up on the little guy told us everything we need to know about this enemy lord. I sent my largest beast to the castle gates and began the missile assault on the enemy. Though the towers inflicted decent damage to several of my units, we managed to light up the sky with constant bombardment of devastating pixies. We snuck our spell wielders to the back and threw a world of hurt down on the reserves and recovering units. After somehow getting one of the beasts inside the gates, we quickly gained ground inside, dismembering the competition and claiming the castle. While we did kill that Vigo guy, they weren't actually a patient who paid for their time, so that doesn't go against our record. After a brief respite, we moved towards Sigvald, coaxing him towards our office, but the coward scampered off in another direction. So we sent out some men to wrestle him into a straitjacket and tossed him onto the field of battle. Sigvald stared somberly at several specialized surgeons, sardonically sneering, steeled in stance, steadying for a savage skirmish. We pretended we couldn't see him, focusing on his troops to frustrate his egotistical mind. Our Furies mangled several men manning a cannon before we suddenly launched the Doom Knights into Sigvald's face. Somehow, Sigvald kicked the Doom Knights' collective ass so hard they fled the fight, so we stopped paying attention to him and concentrated on isolating the Vane Prince. Irritatingly, many of our units were no match for the vapid yet effective enemy, but we found Sigvald's weakness, fire and tentacles. Choosing to not read into this at all, we pounded our message into his well-conditioned head until he was begging for mercy. I searched the map far and wide for the best representation of the next stage, latency, until it hit me. It's Kairos. He's pushed his desires down, and he's generally in control. But after seeing him freeze up at the mention of his absent father, the dude clearly still has issues. We need him to face his ego death and fight fire with fire. He can't have problems if he's not alive. As much as Kairos wanted me to, I could not simply disband him. Scouting for hot armies in my area, I decided to duel Kairos against my least favorite faction to fight on the map, the Tomb Kings. Why are they my least favorite? I hate them. End of story.
That's not the whole story though, is it?
Okay, I hate their elongated chins, I hate their stupid bedroom eyes, and most of all, I hate fighting against them. It's impossible.
So what you're trying to say is they beat you in past battles, wounding your ego, and you aren't yet good at fighting them. Does this have something to do with your childhood fear of sandboxes, or do you have mummy issues of your own?
Smoke bomb!
I couldn't decide if it was best to fuck up this fight on purpose or fight honorably and ensure a loss. I quickly realized that I'd be sticking to the latter regardless of how this looks, but no matter what happens, Kairos will not be moved from the center of the fight with his power of flight not activated. The skeletons charged him as though he was a giant bottle of moisturizer, with no backup, and most of my units dying off immediately. Death embraced our lord. I considered ditching the battle in disgrace to keep my units alive and avoid losing money rebuying all of them, but with Kairos' corpse staring at me from the depths of hell, I let them die, allowing myself to let the poor bastards question whether I ever really loved them as they bled out on the field was pretty cathartic. After a dozen turns re-recruiting Kairos' army and sending them north towards the Empire, it was time to face their fifth genital issue, Orion, the king of Athaloran. I hadn't fought Orion before, and looking at him on the map, the man looks considerably larger than I originally thought he was. Suddenly feeling insecure, I decided to throw another hat in the ring and recruit Nakari. As we wait for Nakari to grow big and strong, we will be taking settlements using a diabolical method I like to call the circle. all. Apparently, Orion dies once a year by willingly hopping into his own funeral pyre, and a couple of months later, his wife hacks away at some poor sacrificial lad to somehow rebirth Orion. But we've deduced that he's too big to be reborn, and obviously, he's performing some kind of a trick. I don't have time for tricks.
Illusions, Dad. You don't have time for my illusions.
He is clearly suffering from the conflict between his primal id urges to set trees on fire and his superego sense of morals guiding him to perform for an audience. Like the vast majority of Freud's theories, the ego theories are unfalsifiable, meaning no one can prove that they're wrong, and therefore they're 100% correct.
What are you talking about? Are you insane?
I'm like the definition of sane. With Nakari's troops finally recruited, I jumped Orion's army on the field. The Wood Elves' early strategy looked like a panicked scrambling until I realized they were just mobbing my units and beating them senseless. Orion, though, just kinda hid from the conflict for the first few minutes, evading our professional advances until Nakari ran the 1,000-meter dash and crashed into him. They would have been evenly matched had the Dryads not gotten involved. With chaos and fairy magic colliding, we managed to keep the forest confined long enough to grind them through the wood chipper and claim victory. As Kairos duct-taped his wounds after the fight, Sarth was approached by Malekith, who without prompting told us that he heard about Kairos letting his dad die by mistake, and he relates as someone who grew up without his dad around very much. He also mentioned his sexually ambiguous relationship with his mother and asked for our help, but he didn't pay for this consultation, and he's uninsured, and we didn't sneak into medical school for 3 months just to do this shit for free, so we sent our deck collector army after him in Hag Gref. Malekith, don't worry, your Oedipus complex is perfectly normal. If you were 5, while his emotional turmoil is high, his battle strategy was effective early on, keeping his forces spread out to hurt our spell kill count. We sent Sarth to strengthen Malekith's ego by letting him get a couple of hits in, while our supporting army climbed his very real metaphorical walls. At the mention of his mother, his internal defenses sprung up, sending my changebringers fleeing for safety. After our troops docked on the walls, we were gaining significant ground quickly, causing Malekith to spiral as he realized he never had control over anything in his entire life. Chicken shit. Our armies took turns shooting each other without gaining the upper hand before we forced our way through the gates and wrung the necks of the leaderless garrison until they went out the way we came in. To my delight, sacking Hag Graf resulted in the acquisition of 29,000 in gold. Malekith fought well up until his cowardly escape, so I decided to hunt down the nearby Morathi to resolve his Oedipus complex and restore whatever shred of dignity he might have left. I popped a cigar in my mouth and channeled the great man. I know Morathi's type, the ages she sat around as a child longing to have a schlong like her male counterparts. She will stop at nothing to mold Malekith into doing what she can't. Well, strap in, Hag. Papa Freud is on his way. Morathi's army stood motionless until moments before we engaged her front lines. Unlike her predecessors, the Hag Queen was eager to charge into battle and lead by example. This confused our brilliant team, as this was a well-adjusted move, and we were used to babbling buffoons. While she was focused on our burning chariot, we corralled her troops into a center mass. But Morathi's spell slingers played into our skills and pounced with hexes. She could not possibly be skilled. This must be plagiarism. Malekith must have told her our secrets. After nearly losing the cavalry, we managed to desecrate their strongest fighters with our monsters while supporting the missile units. Morathi's single flaw was becoming fixated on one target at a time and pinning all of her energy in one place, just as she had done to Malekith all these years. Showing her the error of her ways, we threw several units at her before she was trampled by 100 clinicians eager to make their mark. Though it took a little time before she drowned, we were able to label this a victory. We just took down the healthiest army that we came across. Guess that means we're the ultimate winner if we're able to take down more than just the incapacitated. With every patient successfully cured of their neuroses, we printed off a certificate designating us the official psychoanalyst of this immortal realm with a success rate of, well, hopefully no one asks.
Kat, why are we being sued for malpractice by over 50,000 clients?
He did it!